This week, the salvage squad are heading north to rescue a little bit of Blackpool's history. Down south, we've got the red double-decker bus, but up here in Blackpool, they have the tram, and that's what we're after. Part train, part bus. Blackpool's got dozens of them, some almost 100 years old, and still trundling around 6 million people up and down the prom. As much a part of a black holiday as a stick of rock and a dodgy landlady. The tram we're going to restore is a 1952 coronation class, built the year our Liz got her crown. It was designed to be the queen of Blackpool's fleet, a Rolls-Royce of the prom. Once there were 25 of these beauties on the Golden Mile, but now there are none. If we get ours fixed, it will be the only original coronation tram still working. But there sure is a lot to do. So that's our challenge, to get number 304 back on the tracks and trundling along the seafront just as she did 50 years ago. But at the moment, she's a long way from the sea. Here we are in St Helens, 30 miles south of Blackpool, and apparently our tram is being stored behind the green door. Wow. Have a look at this lot. This is the old St Helens tram shed, now home to 95 classic old buses. And somewhere at the back of this lot, the squad have been checking out the tram.
God, where do you stop?
And looking for all its bits and bobs.
We're going to need these.
It's owned by a chap called Philip Higgs.
The doors slide into here, rather like London Underground.
I'm here to meet him. If only I could find him in this maze of buses.
Really?
It's not that heavy.
After 20 minutes of wandering around, I finally found something that looked like a tram, and the aforementioned Mr. Higgs. So, Phil, let's face it, you are Mr. Tram.
I know, it's sad, isn't it, really?
I don't know about that. When did it begin?
It began when my mum and dad used to take me to Blackpool. They used to go on the fun fair with my brothers and sisters, and I used to say, look, I don't want to go on the fun fair, I just want to watch these trams go by. They were fascinating to me, more so than riding up and down on some roller coaster.
In a strange way, I suppose it's kind of flat roller coaster.
Well, that's right, yeah, it was still a fun ride to me.
Yeah. And how did you become the proud owner of a Blackpool tram yourself?
I actually wrote a book on Blackpool trams, and then with the proceeds of the royalties that came off that, I actually bought this tram.
Wow, extraordinary.
For £600. Sounds, you know, it sounds like nothing, but it was actually quite a lot then.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary that you wrote a book when you were 16 about trams, firstly, but to then spend the money you made from it on a tram, when others would be buying guitars or record players or...
And there was me, yeah, there was me buying a Blackpool tram. It was a bit difficult to explain to my sort of mates at college.
I'm sure it was.
Difficult.
I mean, you know, half the notion of buying a guitar was maybe to get introduced to some of the opposite sex. I can't imagine a tram necessarily has the same...
Funnily enough, actually, the opposite sex weren't all that interested. And still aren't.
Philip's obsession with the magical world of the tram got worse the older he got, and he spent 10 years working as a tram driver before becoming a transport consultant, championing the cause of the tram all over the country. It was in 1984 that Philip first got our tram, but it's a big thing for a 16-year-old to take on. So although he and his mates have been tinkering with it down the years, it's basically still a wreck.
I've driven tram, you know, virtually every tram in the fleet, but I've never driven this one.
You're telling me you've owned this tram for 20 years, but you've never driven it, nor indeed seen it running?
Never. Never, because this tram was phased out before. I mean, when this tram was phased out, I was actually only 3 years old.
OK, Phil, well, here's the deal. We'll take it away and we'll do it up, but you won't be allowed to see it until it's absolutely perfect.
OK, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Have you managed not being able to see it for a bit?
Well, I might have to do some peeping.
No. Promise no?
OK.
All right. Fingers crossed we'll get it done, because it's a tough one. The only place we can fix it is at the tram workshops in Blackpool itself. It's home to the largest fleet of trams in Europe, and if we need any extra help, the place is full of the best tram engineers in the world. The journey north will be her first in 18 years, but it's no easy task. There's 6 ancient buses to move for a kick-off. I've always wanted to do this.
Cliff Richard rides again.
Then she's winched onto a 30-ton low loader for the drive north. It's a pretty unique vehicle, normally used for shifting railway engines around the country.
This is the first time I've seen this move since 1986 when it first came here.
Once secured, she's on the move again. A 2-hour drive up the motorway to her old home, the tram workshops at Blackpool. As she arrives, the local tram spotters are on hand to witness a historic occasion. With the spotters snapping away at ours, I was off down the prom to sample some trams that actually move. Wow. There's over 80 of these things whizzing up and down between here and Fleetwood. It really is like going back in time. They first arrived in Blackpool in 1885, but they reached their prime in the 1930s, when the then boss, a chap called Walter Luff, introduced luxury trams like this balloon class, which still earn their keep on the prom over 70 years later. The key to any tram is the main control unit in the roof. And we've brought in tram expert Brian Pickup to restore ours.
It looks disgustingly complicated.
It is very, very complicated, this, what we call a knitting machine, and we're going to have quite a struggle with that when we get it down.
So that takes the electricity down
It takes
through
electricity
the pole, from the cables
pole,
above.
and then it goes into that control system.
What it does is it actually controls the amount of electricity you're letting through.
It
to
controls
motors.
the electricity
So it's
going
like
down.
a scale electrics controller.
Like a scale electric's exactly the same thing.
The power reaches the control unit via the trolley pole. To make the tram move, the driver simply pulls a lever in the cab and the electricity begins to flow to the 4 motors mounted underneath the body. The tram can be driven from either end. When they want to go the other way, the conductor switches round the pole and the driver changes cabs. But there's a lot more to fix than the control unit. Not only are the sides missing, but the roof's none too good either.
That can't stay on for sure.
And underneath, nothing's run for years.
Right, what have we got here, Brian? These are the motors?
These are the motors.
How many of these do we
There are
have?
4 altogether.
Really?
Yes,
And how long has it been sitting here?
be about 20 odd years since it was used, so really they want a thorough check.
It's not exactly going to be
They'll be full of damp, they'll be full of damp, it won't be an easy job.
Right, well, I have to say this job's mine.
It looks like that's a job for you.
All in all, this is one big job. At the moment, all we have is a shell of a tram with some dodgy wiring. To fix it, Jerry and Brian are going to have to refurbish the control unit in the roof. Axel's going to have to overhaul the 4 electric motors, whilst Claire's going to restore the tower that sits above the control unit and takes the 25-foot-long trolley pole that runs along the overhead cable. That done, they'll have to reclad the body with aluminium and paint it, then refurbish the 50-year-old interior. The tram's now been moved to the electrics bay, ready for the first big task, removing the huge main control unit. Claire and 2 electricians will be working in the frazzle zone, within striking distance of the 550-volt power lines, whilst Jerry waits below. To make sure no one is cooked, the first job is to switch off the juice. Then everybody literally locks the switch, taking their key with them. That way no one can switch on the power again when there's still someone on the roof.
So we're going to lift her up, spin her around slightly, and then drop it down. Do you know what sort of weight we're talking here?
No, not really.
No one's shifted one of these for years, and there are only 3 of them left in the world. So as the last cable's cut, they're in uncharted waters.
Right, should be clear now.
Down the torch. A bit more.
It's clear that.
We don't want to wreck it, we've only got this one.
Lowering the unit was fairly easy, but getting it out is proving more problematic. But don't worry, Jerry's in charge.
Right, stop. Stop everybody. Right, get rid of this. Okay. Right, take it clear. Beautiful. What do you reckon? Slow, slow, slow. Whoa, 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 whoa. Nice and slow.
Phew, he didn't blow it. Which is lucky, because this is no ordinary control unit. It was revolutionary in its day. Unlike the clunky units of earlier trams, its complex circuits were designed to give the ultra-smooth acceleration befitting the Queen of Trams. Down on the prom, I was still riding the old bone shakers. And I was beginning to notice something rather odd. I've been tram spotting now for a couple of hours, and I think I'm becoming a bit of an expert. I've even bought Philip's book. But one thing still puzzles me. I've seen loads of trams from the 1930s, quite a few from the 1980s, but none from the 1950s. Why? Our Coronation tram was meant to be the tram of the future. With its sleek modern lines, it was meant to replace the old trams from the 1930s. But whilst they're still around, the Coronations were scrapped years ago. So that's my quest, to find out why the Coronation did a dinosaur and disappeared from the face of Blackpool Prom.